Welcome to Crossing Phase, the podcast where a Muslim and a Christian talk religion and politics. My name is Matt Hawkins. I am joined by my friend, once again, John Pinna, and he is joining us from upstate New York. Welcome, John.
How you doing, sir? It's good to hear your voice. I think I sound a little melancholy today, but
you're a little melancholy. We'll ramp you up, I promise. I feel it. I think we're going to ramp you up and get you excited. You might be angry excited, but you'll be excited. For those listeners just finding us, you might be listening on crossingphase.com, but we are also available through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and TuneIn, so you can use any of those outlets to find us and listen more frequently, and make sure you download our program. We'd appreciate it. John, we talked about headlines. We wanted to do kind of a headline edition, so this might be, unlike previous shows, we're kind of skipping our rock across a number of different headlines that we are curious about and interested about, but maybe don't care too much to devote an entire program to. What first captured your eye in our stack of stuff?
Well, I figure you're going to hammer me on the picture and on the RNS, the Religion News Service website.
Yeah, I can go there. I think I was gentle on you for the 9/11 edition. So
you're pretty mellow on me on that. I don't know. You're softballing it. I just, that's okay. I mean, like I said, I think I was one of those. I was one of those very vulnerable conversations where I was. You definitely were very Christian and in your approach to me. So I appreciate the soft touch.
Well, it was a somber moment for our nation and a difficult conversation. So I felt like I said, I wanted to give you a lot of runway on that conversation. So for those of you just listening, if you missed the last episode, John shared his reflections on 9/11 as both a New Yorker and a Muslim, and talked about his some of the experiences that his American Muslim family, extended family and close family, experienced following 9/11. So I think it was an important conversation and some interesting stories. But today, I wanted to ask John about a picture that is the top of today's Monday's Religion News stack of pictures, and they are including a picture from Kabul, Afghanistan, on the date of Ashura from last week. We talked a little bit of Ashura. John, do you want to kind of briefly condense what Muharram is and what Ashura is for people who didn't maybe miss the last couple episodes?
Well, Muharram commemorates the Battle of Karbala, which is it's a big Shiite holiday that marks the death of Hussein, who was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. So the event Muharram, the idea is that it commemorates the battle and the tragedy of the multiple deaths that happened in the battle. But for those who don't know, the Shia, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but Shia followed the bloodline to the end of days, the bloodline of the descendants of the Prophet, whereas the Sunni faith, sect of Islam or sects of Islam don't follow the bloodline. Right. So the Muharram is important to both Sunni and Shia, but it holds a lot more weight with the Shia community. And the idea of the death of Imam Hussein, Hazrat Hussein, is a tragic moment in time, because it was the grandson of the Prophet, the individual who was supposed to take the reins and sort of usher in a new era of Islam and unify all of Islam, as opposed to the great split between Sunni and Shia moving even farther apart. 10th Muharram is known as Ashura, and there's no shortage of Ashura jokes, I'm sure this is going to be a good year, that type of thing. And Ashura is the New Year, the Islamic New Year. So it's a time of heavy prayer. And
mourning, we discussed it's not a happy holiday.
Well, the Shia are like the Catholics of Islam. They love their saints. I'm Shia, so they love their saints and they love martyrdom. So, and I mean that in the most respectful way. So, Hazrat Hussein is a cherished and tragic figure in in Shia Islam, his death under the hands of the Umayyad kingdom was terrible. They surrounded the Prophet's family and starved them in the desert for a day, and then started murdering everybody. And so there's usually, depends on what sect you are. Some follow the 10 days of Muharram, some do 12. My in-laws go 60 days Muharram, and that's fasting and mourning for 60 days. Yeah. Wearing black. So there's this, it depends on what you're doing and what sect you come from. But the picture is about matam. Yeah. And so, which is self-flagellation, and we know that there are many sects of many religions that do this. Yeah. And so this is generally matam happens at most Shia mosques, where they tap their chest over their heart in a very light way, but they do it in rhythm, and while there's prayer being cited, and in sort of solidarity, and also as a way to, as a gesture of faith and an honor of Hazrat Hussein. But some go even farther, and the picture you're seeing is with a chain and some blades and bloody backs. And as you well know, there's some some movies about the Templars doing this and other Christian sects doing this sort of thing, and so this is a little bit of extreme, extreme.
So when I saw it, I was curious, like, where that particular practice for this comes from. Is it something that's mainstream Shia practice? Is it more cultural? I was curious to the origins. Does it come from texts?
The largest Shia population the largest Shia group are the Twelvers. They follow what's called the 12th Imam, or the 12th descendant of Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, and they have this tradition that comes out of the survivors of Muharram, and the idea that this day should be commemorated. So Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, said that every year or on a routine basis, we should have a majlis, we should have a gathering as a religious community, and we should commemorate what happened and remember. And so there's a little poetic license on that. I said, you're dealing with a community that is very passionate about martyrdom and very passionate about sainthood and very passionate about all these things. So the idea of getting as close as you can, as I think much like you guys do, you try to mimic the prophet, right? You try to mimic Jesus in some manner, shape, or form. And there's a lot that try to go through the struggles. I think so. When I just was up at this place called Inwood with my buddy, it's a really pretty place in upstate New York. It's where the Ursula nuns hang out, and they have the Stations of the Cross, and and he was like, "What was that?" And I go, "Well, it's like sort of like a pantheon of all the different moments that Jesus went through before he was getting crucified. It's kind of like a pantheon of terror." And I was like, so I don't know what you guys think of it, but I was like, I walk, and he was like, well, let's go walk the path. I said, okay, we'll walk it, but it's not pretty. So we walk it. So it's, Jesus carrying the cross, he falls with the cross, the cat of nine tails. And he's like, what is this all about? I go, I don't really know. I don't really know. He's like, I think they're just honoring the events and leading up to the crucifixion. And I feel that people they have different prayer at each station. So, but it seems very negative to me. Yeah. So I don't know. But it's in Shiism, this is something that is very passionate about. So the tradition comes from out of this idea that out of the battle, there should be some commemoration, and people take that idea of honoring the life and death of the grandson of Muhammad is a you got to use matam, do matam. And I think that the gesture is, I get yelled at every time I go to the mosque during Muharram because I don't do it.
Yeah.
My argument is, if I would say, you're a married man, aren't you, Matthew?
Yes.
You're married, right?
Yes, I am.
So you're doing matam every day.
Oh,
okay, so that's
the
my
views
shtick.
expressed about marriage not equally reflected by both hosts.
So I mean, I'm just
Be quick to say.
So that's the deal. I mean, I had my own personal struggle. I was trying to get to the tea, to the chai, and there's this thing called Kashmiri chai, which is like pink tea. And it is made like all day long. You have to have it like a nani, like a grandmother, spend time putting the tea together with all kinds of spices, and it's just delicious.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let anybody to the tea. And of course, so that was my personal struggle.
That was your personal struggle, was not being able to make it to the tea.
So I tried to get the tea. They had these two guys that were beef in front of it. And I just told him, I was like, listen, move out of the way. I don't know what you guys are doing. A little bit of Urdu. I'm like, up kids, say, hey, what do you guys, what's up? What's happening? How you guys doing? And they were like, no, the tea's for everybody after Montam. And I go, let me just tell you what's going to happen now. I'm going to get myself a cup of tea. And that is what it is. So they're like, why aren't you?
You short circuited the thing.
Yeah, I get myself into trouble because, first of all, anybody who's ever had Kashmiri chai, if understands will understand this conversation. Anybody that hasn't had it, it's not going to get. They're like, what do you mean? It's just tea. I'm like, It's this beautiful, beautiful pink tea that's only made right by like an older Pakistani lady who knows how to do it. And it's just something beautiful. One of the most beautiful things on the planet. And so I just wanted a cup. I wanted to get a little cup, and while everybody's mothering out, let me just get out of here. Let me just get a cup of tea, a little chai, sit, relax, And so I had this conversation with these guys, and they were chatting back and forth with me about it. And I go, oh, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to make myself a cup of tea, and you guys are going to let it happen. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't have the patience for this. So, and eventually we made friends and everything else, but it was funny that they were guarding the tea, Of course, I had a bunch of kids.
Someone assigned them to do that, John. They're trying to be faithful to their ritual.
Yeah, I had a bunch of kids with me, and I was like, these kids, think about the children. Even though they were just a conveyance for me to get my cup of tea. So it was, but it's. I'm usually the guy who hangs out with the kids that reads the books and does all this stuff because some of this stuff is a little bit too heavy for me. As a Smiley, I don't prescribe to some of the stuff. And there's only one JK, only one Jamaat Kona, which is where Smiley's pray in the DC area. So, but this picture is, I mean, it's not an unfair characterization of what goes on. It's quite common with the 12er community. There's always a couple of zealots out there doing this. I'm not coordinated enough to handle something like this, so I'm pretty sure I would cut my nose off or hurt somebody around me.
And there's also a picture of another picture at the bottom of, I think, an Indian Hindu guy who was selling the knives to Muslims.
Yeah. I mean, this is like it's a big thing, and they're sort of it's an honored event. So people look at it. Some people look at it as hardcore. Some people look at it as very faithful. I have a tendency. Like, you would do whatever you want. You want to murder yourself for your religion, great. I can't. I'm not going to weigh in on what that is. I mean, I've weighed in on religious freedom issues because of how my faith, I'm doing Matam right now. You know what I mean? I'm hoping I don't slip into the conversion, to evangelicalism. I don't know.
You're fielding pestering questions from an evangelical. That's your suffering.
So, but the thing is it's a really neat pick that the one that's in the Indian Muslim sells the blade. God, these guys, they're. This is what they live for all year. And it's, look at it like absolving sins. Look at it as, doing this high honor. You have the scars on the back. You're healing they go through this sort of euphoric moment where they don't feel pain anymore. I mean, I don't, maybe that's what Jesus did with the cross, the Stations of the Cross. They say they was hit with the cat of nine tails. and then he got through the whole roads and everything else. Maybe he was on a persecution high. I don't know, but that's what these guys are into. And I mean, I hats off to them. I think it's part of their faith, and I'm not going to devalue that at all. It's just not for me. So, do you guys have you ever done that? Have you ever thrown yourself down the stairs or
No, not intentionally, and no, not for the sake of worship. No.
What's the worst? What have you done any sort of self-flagellation for worship? Anything? Is there what's considered?
Not self.
Give me some.
Not self-flagellation. No. I think you're right that Christians do take time from time to time in varying ways to acknowledge the suffering that Christ experienced, we believe, on our behalf. And so the most powerful moment that I recalled was we had a Good Friday service. So it's the Friday before Easter Sunday. So reflecting on the day and evening that Christ died on the cross. And for those Good Friday services tend to be very quiet and subdued, sometimes just by candlelight. It's a very prayerful service, as opposed to like an Easter Sunday morning service where everything is more happy and celebrating the resurrection. We on Good Friday tend to be more somber, more reflective of Christ's experience and our own sin. It's called Good Friday because even though as dark and as evil as the moment was, we believe it was necessary for
providential.
It was providential, number one, and it was necessary for our relationship with God to be healed, and so we. Good Friday services tend to not be all that long in America, in American Protestant services. Typically, communion is pretty common, and different churches do it differently. Sometimes it's just prayer. Sometimes it's a short message. Sometimes it's a full sermon. Sometimes it's some singing mixed with prayer, in and out, and. One of the most powerful ones that I participated in, this was in a church in West Virginia where I grew up. They had a full-sized replica cross, in the center of the church, in the front of the stage. I think they had moved the podium, and people who wanted to, we were offered little metal rustic nails upon our entrance, and we were allowed to at a certain point in the service, people kind of filed up one by one, and if they wanted to, took that nail and nailed it physically into the wood cross.
Turned them into Jesus nails? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. John's reflecting on our second episode of this podcast, but yeah, it turned him into
buy your
commemorative
Jesus nails
at
www.crossingface.com.
Right.
You know, because that was a good segue. We had the whole idea that if the Jesus nails exist, we could resurrect Jesus with the DNA.
With the DNA and the cloning apparatus, yeah. So anyway, that was a really powerful moment, and I think maybe one of the most powerful moments of Good Friday service that I've been a part of, because we were, all. It was it was an act of not so much self-flagellation, but recognizing our own role and our own sin in putting Christ on the cross. And so that was a pretty powerful moment. Closest thing in Protestant life that I've seen.
You have these sort of wholesome and thoughtful stories. You're thinking about this, and I'm thinking the only time that I ever saw Christian flagellation was this. I was talking to this Catholic girl, and she had told me she was wearing some kind of chain on her leg, and to feel, because it was self-flagellation. She goes, she wears it to remind herself of the struggle of Jesus. And I go, oh, okay. Uh-huh. I go, well, let's see it. And she pulled up her skirt and showed me the chain on her thigh, and
Oh.
it was really erotic. Like it
John.
was like I was just gonna say right now, like how I keep like
This
that
is a
image
family
came to my-
program.
Well, I don't. That's not. I mean, I don't. Is that bad?
No.
I don't know if that's bad, but it was something. And she had like this devout faith, but then she showed me her leg, and it was weird. It was 50% devoutness and Christian and all this other stuff, and the other side of it was this
Pretty dark.
Yeah. So I have that image in my mind, and I'm going, she seemed really devout, but she definitely. I don't. Was that maybe? I mean, maybe it's okay to just show it, but it was pretty hot.
Wow.
So that's edited out now. So.
I think that sounds like it's whatever expression that is. Certainly from my camp and tribe would be that is unnecessary. Christ took the burden of suffering off of us, and that's the glory of the gospel, is that we don't have to self-flagellate or otherwise suffer for the sake of relating to Christ or achieving some sort of status.
Yeah, it's the same in Islam. I think that the idea of having to, I think my Sunni brothers and sisters would definitely agree on this one, is that the prophets have their mission. They do what they do, and and whatever happened. Boom. To reinvigorate that occurrence is sort of like a opt-in situation, but in the same respect, once that whatever, it didn't matter whether it's Moses or this one or Musa, it doesn't matter. Whatever happened. We don't need to go down the path of trying to sacrifice our son, like Abraham and trying to and waiting for God to say, no, we don't have to go down that path,
right.
Because we're going to have our own struggles and trials and everything else that's along the lines of, providence, as you guys would say, and then go down that road. But I think that
and even in the Jewish tradition, in the Hebrew scriptures, we call the Old Testament, the blood sacrifices were always substitutionary. They were always animals, right?
Right.
So there was not.
Yeah, and we do that too in Islam. We do qurbani. We sacrifice the lamb and then disperse the meat, but it's a ritualistic sacrifice during Ramadan and through other holidays. Yeah.
And I do see in scripture some moments of self-humiliation or humbling of themselves. So I think of Job, who wore basically burlap in his grief. But I think that's something different than self-flagellation. Maybe related, but different.
Okay, so here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Completely change the subject.
Yes.
So was Jesus wearing a magic cloak when he was healing the bleeding woman?
All right. I don't think so.
You got three versions of it. We got Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Right. Yep.
And they all are ramped up in different directions. So, and there's three sort of testimonies of what happened. So, in one testimony, which I think is Luke, it's like the most sort of reactionary. Jesus is going somewhere, and he's about to do this whole thing where he's en route to something, right?
Yeah.
And then the lady touches the cloak, and he freaks out. And he says, "Who touched my cloak? I'm drained of my power."
Yeah.
And then they figure out it's the woman. He goes, "Oh, you're healed." Blah 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 blah. Then it gets to be more religious and Christian as you go through the different, like Mark and Matthew, right?
Yeah.
So we have three versions of the same thing. And my question is he using magic devices?
No.
I'm just asking. Well, why is the cloak drained? Explain that to me.
The cloak's not drained. Christ said he felt his power drain. He didn't say.
How does that happen if he's God?
Well, he's human. He's both human and God, and he may have been exaggerating. Jesus did that from time to time, but he clearly felt his healing power extend from him outward.
So, okay. So I'm just saying, I've always wondered about this one. So, because you have three independent versions, so I'm trying to think of where it is, but you probably know the sections, right?
What's
So
in Luke? It is Luke
so
8:43.
so it's 8:43.
I'm looking this up. I do not have this memorized.
Mark, it's 5:25, and then it's 9:20 in Matthew. So all right. So what happens? Maybe we should start with maybe at the beginning. You tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So
the
Jesus is
Luke
walking with
account,
the disciples.
Yeah. The Luke account says, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him, Jesus, and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing on you." So Peter's writing it off as you're in a crowd, people are going to hit you. But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceived that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and now she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace."
Right. And then there's different versions, though. The two other versions that are not contradictory. I don't know if they're not that, but it's one of the few, I think, events that we have multiple versions of.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of overlap.
So is it a cloak of healing?
No, it's not a cloak of healing.
I'm just asking. You know,
even Christ said, "Your faith has made you well."
Right.
And it's not her faith alone. If we're going to talk
it's
Christian
Jesus magic
theology,
yeah.
it's the object of her faith. So she placed her faith in Jesus, having confidence that he could heal her. And just by grabbing hold of his cloak, even without his attention, she was healed.
Okay.
Not the cloak.
I was just going to ask. That was always bothered me.
I know you're fascinated with religious artifacts and memorabilia.
Well, the staff. I still feel like somebody should try it out. Someone should bring it.
Yeah.
Bust it out.
Use the staff and see if they can spread the water.
Well, something.
If the Turkish government will let them have it.
Maybe a little. Right. How cool would that be if the water moved on the table?
Yeah.
And maybe it's got residual splitting abilities.
Or if you took your coffee cup, your cup of Turkish coffee near it, would it split the coffee in your cup?
Or maybe hair.
That would be a simpler test.
All right. So
moving on.
We digress.
We digress. Do you want to go to Uyghurs in China or Muslims and Hindus praying together?
Well, Muslims. I mean, you showed me this article about Muslims and Hindus praying together, and I'm going. We all know that the Indians rocked into Kashmir, and my Tibetan Muslim friends are very joyous right now. So there's a population in northern Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, that are Tibetan Muslims. And what does that mean? They're culturally Tibetan. They were Buddhists at one point. And then when that entire area was converted to Islam, they became Tibetan Muslims.
Because we commonly hear about Tibetan Buddhists, but the Tibetan Muslims, I think, is just to underscore, it's probably a newish term for most Americans.
Yeah, and it's a tough lot. They're culturally Tibetan, and that means that they have a sort of soft heart. They have very Buddhist overtones, which are not. They're not isn't antithetical to Islam, but the group that they are part of generally are Shia Twelvers, which is a very devout and group that believes in the fundamentals of Islam.
Yeah,
so
we've talked about this on the program before.
Yeah, and so I think that that's a it's a tough lot. It's a tough position to be in, because then you are part of this sort of really relaxed religious outlook, cosmological view, and then on the other side of it, you are trying to adhere to all these traditions, including Ashura and Matam, right? And these traditions that tie very, very closely to these events that are fundamental in Shia Islam. So my one friend and who's part of this, who's a Tibetan Muslim, was very joyous about the movement into Kashmir, and the Indians are having citizen tests. The paperwork that one family uses, one member of the family uses to justify their citizenship is denied by when another family member uses it. Suspension of rule of law. There's interrogations, imprisonments, all kinds of other stuff going on. And, we all know that the Modi government is passionate about the idea of a Hindu state, which is the complete opposite of what Gandhi advocated for, is the one India concept, as opposed to the one Hindu concept. And so, it's a confederation of states, India. So, and the idea is Modi was involved in the Gujarati, I don't know if it's called a massacre, but in attacking, when he was early in his career, attacking Muslims and imprisoning them, and some really harsh tactics towards Muslims in Gujarat. In the same respect, you've got a country that's 60, 70 years old, and it is very difficult to maintain this confederation of states. The South is generally a different religion than they're culturally Indian, but you have 200 million Muslims in India, and another 100 million or so Christians, and I think the Modi government, and I don't know if it's Modi himself, to be honest with you. I know he was harsh in his past, and I know he moved into Kashmir. I think that he needs to advocate for religious communities and and start to get a larger control over his government. But they're closing a church a week in India,
right. And India's not been kind to Christianity as of late.
Yeah, and the Muslims, they just go just short of imprisonment, just short of some of these things. So the picture that you're showing, that article you sent me, was about Hindus and Muslims praying in the same space, and I think that they're all culturally Indian. Yeah, my in-laws would kill me if I said this.
Well, you don't have to say it.
Yeah, they don't. Potato.
They're not going to listen.
Well, look. Most Pakistanis were expelled from India. Okay. And Pakistan has a tough lot. I'm not too sympathetic on Pakistan, but Pakistan has a tough lot. You have a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, multi-sectional Muslim population that was all expelled from India. Yeah. Okay, so they're struggling to maintain this identity. Like you go to Punjab, they speak Punjabi. No one knows what that language is except the Punjabis. Yeah. So. And then you have to figure out the ethnic, cultural, religious components, and it's hard for me to get that out of my head. I mean, Afghanistan, I have that, and most people are trying to figure out that, and I can tell you about tribes, I can tell you about this, that, and the other. But the challenge is that I think Pakistanis struggle with a cultural identity centered around Pakistan, and the wonder why there's so much unrest is because you have a very diverse, not the most diverse, but a very diverse Muslim population. Right. And like I said, interethnic, multicultural, and so forth. So Tibetan Muslims are part of that population. Yeah. So, but everybody has a cultural Indian ancestry. Yeah. I think I'm safe to say that. And you have a problem. There's a little bit of an issue when it comes to that partition and the idea of a Pakistan identity. Yeah. And I understand that once the partition happened, the northern territories were invaded immediately, and the Pakistanis have held those territories. And it's a difficult situation now. The Indian government is trying to show that they're a strong government, go into the region and trying to lock down their authority. But when you're suspending rule of law and you're imprisoning people and you're denying citizenship to get rid of the Muslims, it's like, Yeah. I don't know if that's the right way of going about it.
Yeah.
We get it. They hate the Muslims, but what do you want to say?
Well, they're not. They may hate the Muslims, but they're certainly not crazy about Christianity. Also, to underscore, like this is a situation where both Muslims and Christians are facing persecution by the same government and in the same culture.
And I would argue that these are probably, and I'm not sure if this is true, but probably the two largest Christian and Muslim populations outside of the larger Ummah, right? So, 200 million Muslims live in India, and roughly about 70, 80 million Christians, I think, right?
Yeah.
So that's a huge amount of people.
Both religions have been there a long time.
Yeah, I don't know what and I don't know the origins of. I know the Mughals is where a lot of the Muslim population comes from, but I couldn't tell you where the Christians come from. But I'm sure there was an evangelical involved. So
blame the evangelicals.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was like the Portuguese or something, but I really don't know. The point is that I think it's the Portuguese in the south, part of these old and ancient communities. But I think that there's, if you want to, I think that there's a real big opportunity to work within the largest democracy in the world to advocate for religious freedom with using these two populations. And there are plenty of Hindus that are persecuted too. They got the Dalits, which are the lowest class in the caste system. The Dalits are persecuted as well, and that's like 300 million people right there.
Yeah.
So
there are two things about this story that jumped out at me. On the one hand, any opportunity where you have Hindu, in this context especially, given that background where you have Hindus and Muslims, in the same community, cooperating with each other, studying together, eating together, like that's encouraging. But something jumped out to me. There's a line in the RNS story that says, quote, "Raised an Orthodox Hindu in this city southeast of New Delhi, Mohandan believes both Hindu mantras and Islamic rituals are conduits to the same God," unquote. So that was confusing to me for what's probably obvious to you, because I understand Islam to be a monotheistic religion, and I understand Hinduism to be a polytheistic religion. And so that statement that Hindu mantras and Islamic rituals are conduits to the same God. Now, that's not a quote. It's a descriptive paragraph in the Religion News article. That was curious to me. Can you all right, unpack that? Do you know what they're talking about?
Yeah. All right. So I feel like I'm in a hate crime because my pronunciation of Indian words might kill somebody with it. Just they're very sharp.
Well, whatever your pronunciation is, my friend, it's going to be better than mine.
So there's Paramatma, which is, and I'm going to only do this once because I'm closing my eyes and trying to remember. Okay, right.
We're asking our Hindu friends to extend grace to both of us at the moment.
Well, I need Jay Kansara. I need the guy from the Hindu American Foundation. I need these guys. So let's see. It's Paramatma, which is like the big self, like supreme self. Then there's the Parameshwar, which is Parameshwar, I think, which is the supreme Lord. And then, or like the guy, like the high Lord. And then there's the Param. Okay, I remember. It's terrible. I remember this because it's a piece of bread. Parampita, I think, which is the Supreme Father. So it's like it's the Trinity, dude. And then, so you have, this is terrible. All right, so it's those three things that, and then there's some other, there's a peppering of other concepts. That Ishwara, I think, and then Mahashwara, and then there's the I can't remember, it's Bhawan, and then the Purusha, and then there's two other really long words that I can't remember. So the idea is that in the Vedas and then other scriptures, all this coalesces into this idea of Brahman, which is like one God. Right? And so, and that's infinite, expansive, and the supreme God. And then you have all these other sort of, everything comes out, everything sparks from that. Right. And I know that there's like the universal male, the Purusha, and then I know there's the Prakriti, which is like the nature of matter and divine energy. So there's all kinds of stuff that comes out of this stuff, and how the idea that there's these teachings of worships that come out of this, these different features within Hinduism. And of course, like I said, I only know the broad strokes, but essentially Brahman is the one God. And that ties to these concepts that I was telling you about self, Lord, and Father. So I think that's what the intent of the statement was. Although, I'm not going to weigh into
it ruffled some other feathers.
Yeah, because the idea that Hindus, like, everybody wants, my shtick. My shtick is, look, Abrahamic lineage is Abrahamic lineage. You guys believe in the same God we do. It's the same stories. We got that little sliver of the crucifixion. We got that little thing. But aside from that, everything's on point. Then,
so, would you describe yourself as theologically, basically, a pluralist?
I'm a pluralist who happens to be Muslim.
Right.
I just got yelled at by my 12er friends. My 12er friend walks in and he says, "Why don't you just be Christian? Why don't you just be Christian? You like Jesus so much." I go, I don't appreciate when anyone devalues any of the prophets, whether it be Musa, Moses, Abraham, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And here's the thing: is we have a common thread with Hazrat Isa, and that common thread is real. And the active part of Hazrat Isa in our both of our faiths is not only a bridge, but it's a bond between us. The priesthood is the same. If someone converts from Islam to Christianity, okay, you want to go for it, go for it. If you can reconcile the crucifixion, go for it. Great. Again,
a subject that we have gone on about, and we'll continue to do so.
Right. So here's the question: Why does the cross with the Jesus on it have to be the symbol of Christianity? Why?
Right.
Why? It seems very negative.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about that before. But anyways, before we muddy the water, I think when it comes to Hinduism, we're talking about, I'm not going to go down, I don't know if it's Abraham, but I do think that, and I could be mistaken, they have like an Adam-like figure. So why didn't all this stuff, it's all like a nuanced approach and contextualization to the market. Uh-huh. My whole argument with you is why that maybe the Arabian Peninsula needed the prophet because it needed to be contextualized to the market, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We just needed a little extra. And then of course we got the split. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I was curious.
Is that a decent explanation? I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
It's all true as far as you know.
As far as I know, I'm taking your word for it. We're gonna get corrective mail and tweets from people. The monotheism, polytheism piece was interesting to me, and given your pluralist bent. The brief study I had of Islam some years back, is there a sense that part of Islam has in its long arc a bend towards a pluralism or a universalism with respect to ultimate salvation? Is that a fair characterization, or is that a nuance?
Well, the whole idea that you needed to know Arabic in order to pray salat, so I always say salat out. It's supposed to be a unifying effect. Everyone learns the same language so they can communicate across borders. The intent behind it is very evangelical in many respects, not from an idea of like go out and make merry and bring everybody in, but the idea that there is a multiple unifying qualities within the religion that will enlarge the ummah and appeal to the ummah. That's why do you think it's Abrahamic? It ties right to Judaism. It ties right to Christianity. It ties right to these things where it's very familiar, the stories, and it gives you a roadmap to the end of days. So, and that roadmap is on the Shia side is a bloodline, and then with the Sunnis, it's the schools of jurisprudence. So, I think that the intent behind it was to. Certainly, there's theological justifications for it, and is the idea that everybody comes on board. Just jihad. The idea of jihad, it's a defensive tactic when you're being attacked and oppressed. So the perversion of that into what it is today is atrocious by a small group of Muslims or those who used to be Muslim who now are capitalizing on this terminology and exploiting an uneducated class of people, and or those who are disenfranchised. So yeah. I think that the idea of making a religion of peace that focuses on love and all the wonderful characteristics of the previous religions that can come before us, or I would even say the current religions that are an active part of Islam, whether it be Christianity, Islam, whether it be even this statement about Hinduism. I mean, it's the same. We can't all have. There can't be 17 supreme lords out there, right? And then all of a sudden we're all gonna. It's going to be a battle to the death until one of us becomes, there could be only one, very Highlander-ish, right? Yeah. If the Supreme Lord is there, God, Allah, whatever you want to call him, Yahweh, then it's like the school that I built in one of the schools I built in the Northern Territories. There, we had to get the approval of the warlords. So we named each side of it after a different warlord, and we dedicated it 4 different times in order to get their approvals. So we built 6 schools up there, primary schools, K through 12. And so I don't know. I don't think God operates that way. I don't think Allah operates that way. I think that there's the wrathful God, who is really not the nicest guy on the planet. And I think we all have that all our traditions have the same stories, the floods and the stuff. So I think that the challenge is that the intent behind Islam was to unify initially, I think, the Arabian Peninsula, but it was also to create those gateways into the multi-faith universe and allow us to communicate with the same germane terminology back and forth so that we could build those bridges. The challenge is that we don't talk along those lines. We have a tendency to talk about under the lens of Al Qaeda, the lens of ISIS, the lens of these things. And when I talk to you under the lenses of the Aryan Brotherhood and the Klan and those. And so that creates the inability for us to see the similarities. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how anybody in Kentucky can understand Islam if no one's talking about the religion appropriately. Yeah. I don't know. Was that a good answer? I don't know.
No, it was a fine answer. And I appreciate it because like I said, the thing jumped out to me is what jumped out to me was the assertion that Hinduism and Muslims could plausibly worship the same God, and people may have differing opinions on that. But then, knowing that kind of long arc of kind of a pluralist, universalist view of Islam, I was kind of curious that maybe that statement wasn't as far off as it looked initially to me. Compared to an exclusivist kind of religion like my own that believes that there's only one way to Christ or one way to God, and that's through Jesus Christ. That makes it a little more difficult even for those of us in our everyday lives to talk to one another, given that those differences exist, right? So in your view, the similarities are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the similarities are kind of the meat, right? And the differences are the surface. Whereas I view the similarities between religions being more surface level, and then the meat of the religion being more different.
Well, I'll tell you what this is what I was taught. I was taught Abrahamic lineage. I was taught like order out of chaos was polytheism, and the one God concept comes to us through the Zoroastrians. The word comes to us from the Israelites. Then the priesthood, imamship, was restored by Hazrat Isa. And then the bloodline to the end of days comes from Hazrat Muhammad. That's what I was learned. That's what I learned. So, and that's a unique way of looking at things. I think my grandfather and my father would say, you can jump on that train at any stage you want. So you want to be, if you want to be in the Christian camp, it's still the same lineage, it's Abrahamic lineage. You're fine.
Yeah.
So maybe you're not ready or willing to accept the bloodline. That's fine. Okay. Now, but I think that shows a unity and a lineage and an understanding of the cosmological view of humanity from the beginning to the end of days. If you're telling me that until evangelicals were around during the bulk of human civilization, everybody got it wrong.
Right.
I'm like, how presumptuous is that? So, and you guys are relatively newcomers to the planet. So,
we'll demarcate between kind of the modern expression of evangelicalism and what we would probably claim or observe as little o orthodox expressions of the Christian faith that we believe are evangelistic, if not
right.
not wearing the title evangelical so much.
Well, but let's look at it this way. Until Asadisa shows up, Christianity essentially did not exist.
Right.
So for the bulk of human existence, everybody just got it wrong. Everybody was just fooling around. So I think the challenge.
We believe the Hebrew scriptures and the Jewish people had the revelation from God that was continued through Jesus. That's our claim.
Yeah. So, but even still, that sect, that religious group, was very small.
Yeah.
So the challenge, and I'm not even really asking a question. I know it kind of sounds like I'm putting you on the spot. I'm saying so everybody got it wrong. So like Mithros was no good. The Greek gods, So we got all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a good amount of religious and cultural and ethnic traditions that have permeated into the different religious groups and religious faiths and religious traditions that we have today. I know you guys kind of cut it all out. You guys are just, straight cross, big on the priesthood of Jesus, and you guys have sort of cut all that stuff away, which, I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just going to say we have a very rich history that's led us up to this point, whether it's your tradition or my tradition or anyone else's. And I think that we rather than focus on the nexus of our differences, in this case, when it comes to Hinduism and Islam, I think that if you say we're worshiping the same God, we do it differently. Thank God for saying that. Okay, think about, oh my God. So here we are, and you can say, well, we shouldn't be killing each other because we are subject to the same judgment, which is, you guys are big on that word. So there's a consequence if we're violating whatever the concept, whatever the whatever tradition we have to attacking our brothers and sisters who are still faithful, even though they may not be quite as far along as you think they should be. So.
Yeah, well, I think for the Christian, a Christian response might be to we would acknowledge our religious differences or the differences in the claims of our religion, but our extension of love to say you and Hindus and other people of different faiths is rooted in our understanding of everybody being a creation of God, bearing His image, right? And
having a role, providential role,
and so and being loved by God, and so we would root, instead of rooting it in kind of a similar claim or a similar understanding of God, we would root it in the similarity of creation, I think, which is a helpful way to really, I think, awaken Christians to care about the religious other, and give people a starting point for people who kind of recognize that we have differing theological claims, but we still need to relate to one another.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good way to look at it. I mean, you and I collaborate. I'm going to hell, aren't I?
Well, I hope you're not, John.
Well,
Remember,
I mean,
we agreed on an earlier episode. And I'm always trying to convert you.
what did I say? Are you trying to convert me? You said always.
Always.
Always, yeah.
No.
What was my response?
You declared that Islam was doing quite well. Thank you very much.
I
And
think I said
you were
it's
winning
not a
the competition.
It's not a competition, but if it is, I think we're winning.
That's right.
Because we're like 1.6 billion, and we're growing.
Yeah.
So, I think that, but I think these dialogues are really important. I think statements like that are really important I think somebody a lot smarter than me needs to kind of get into the weeds with that statement. And we're just going to start having guests on the show because I think we've got enough banter and we're getting better at this. I don't know. I'm not sure that's true, but
we're certainly better at heckling one another.
Yeah. So, I think that we need to get a Hindu, a scholar, religious, something, and a Muslim, intellectual, both maybe two intellectuals to actually weed into that, weigh into that statement, and then us to haze them into taking a position. But we also need to get a Catholic and a Eastern Orthodox because we got to start talking about that schism and what happened.
Yeah.
Because Peter started the church, but the church is split.
Yeah, and then where the schism has healed, apparently, in some relationships.
Or it's getting even worse in the case of Ukraine.
Right, for sure. So, lastly, before we go, jump topics completely. We've talked about the plight of Uyghur Muslims in China.
Oh my God!
And how terrible that is.
80 million Muslims being persecuted
systematically.
Yes, cultural genocide. Taught that they're not able to learn a language. They're not able to learn a religion. Children are separated and brought to re-education camps.
Right. And so the U.S. Senate last week, at least the announcement, the press release was on September 11, but it's a bipartisan bill sponsored by Rubio and Menendez. The passage of Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act S-178.
Yeah.
Needs to be ratified by the House and get the president's signature. John Pinna, what does this matter? Does the policy have any teeth?
Well, we'll see. If American businessman and former U.S. Navy SEAL and founder of the government services security company Blackwater, who is now I don't know, he's the CEO, I think, of Frontier Services, which is a Chinese-owned security and development firm. I don't know if anybody could argue that Eric Prince is not gone to the other side. I don't know how you could argue that he has not.
Yeah.
The brother of Betsy DeVos, the assistant secretary or the secretary of education, and if this thing gets passed, then the first person you got to go after is this guy, who's building training camps, re-education camps in China.
Yeah,
who is capturing U.S. government logistic contracts.
Yeah,
by a Chinese firm. Who is currently conducting operations in Somalia. I don't know how. To me, this would be a benchmark.
The Bloomberg report from months ago is pretty staggering.
Yeah,
about the activity of an American businessman and former Blackwater guy doing business with Chinese folks who are incarcerating Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah, so my thing is let's see what Rubio does. Let's see what these guys do. If they're back in this bill, the next question is, what do you do about an American that is violating international religious freedom? I don't know if I'm going to say law. I'm going to say international religious freedom rights. And he's an American. He's an American businessman, not working with, he's working for. He's the CEO of Frontier Services Group, which is a Chinese firm.
Yeah.
And so and is the brother of a current sitting secretary of one of our agencies. I just don't get it.
Yeah.
and
Certainly doesn't look well.
No, yeah, and who's also trying to drive policy at the White House and get us embroiled in a deeper war with Iran and working with the Ukrainians and all kinds of other stuff that's going on there. So I think that would be a good benchmark to see what happens to this guy, but I don't think anything's going to happen. So
what do you make of this inclusion of or creation of an FBI report related to U.S. citizens and folks from abroad getting Chinese government harassment and intimidation on American soil? Or is that too big a topic for a couple minutes?
Well, I think the Chinese, the Chinese, Russians, they operate differently. There has been a dismantling of our U.S. intelligence apparatus. The focus has been on electronic warfare. It's been heavily militarized. Yeah. And the worst thing that's ever happened to our intelligence service is what's the movies? What are those movies called? The Bourne Identity.
Right.
So the challenge is we've lost the nuance in intelligence gathering, what's called human intelligence. We've lost it. We're not deploying and training and culturally competent individuals and deploying them to the field. It's heavily militarized. I mean, it's all these guys that are beef walking around, and you can make them right away. I mean, I remember I was in a Muslim country, and we were talking about ISIS, and I reported out and to the U.S. government, and sure enough, these guys walked in there, and they were in cultural clothes, speaking Dari, and the local languages, doing their thing, and you can make them a million miles away because they're all beef, So they didn't walk right. Huh. They weren't culturally. They had all the courses, all this stuff, and it was terrible. And I don't think we're deploying good intelligence services. But here's the thing: The Russians are. Everybody is. The Russians are. The Chinese are, and they have used the electronic warfare. They use their military. They use all these things as tools, as assets for their human intelligence. And you got to check your phone all the time. You got to download the battery app and make sure your battery's not being drained by an app that's on there erroneously. And that's how you test to see if you're being listened into. There's other ways, but that's one of the ways. So to answer your question, I think that these countries are emboldened. I think that they have a much more robust and strong intelligence gathering apparatus because of the militarization and the heavily reliance on electronics and warfare and so forth that we use, and there hasn't been a concentration on making sure that we have those culturally competent language speakers and people that know how to do what they do in countries that can live and swim in those waters. So I think that the Chinese are doing it. I mean, the Chinese got Eric Prince. They got a former Navy SEAL working as their CEO. Now, but here's the other side. Maybe Eric Prince is just a plant from our government. Maybe he's working there and he's gathering all this information on the Chinese
think
businesses.
The best of them.
Well, I'd like to think that. I like to think that the guy's smarter than is a pretty smart guy who's never left the employ of the U.S. intelligence service and is just being disruptive. And all kinds of other stuff. He's got, I'd like to think that he's maybe a patriot, that's heavily deep undercover, that's doing all this stuff. Maybe he is our ace in the hole with the Chinese. Maybe he has it all figured out, and maybe he's the real deal, and maybe all this flack and the card, the get out of jail free card that he gets is for a reason, so. And that's why he's heavily embedded in these operations. So maybe he is who he is, But I have a feeling if he's worth $2.4 billion, that he's not.
He's not on the intelligence payroll.
That he's not. But then again, I don't know. I'm more than willing to say I think that the prince is could be a patriot, and I could just, I'm just talking as a guy that's right outside and. Confused and disoriented with his whole career path. But I do think that his plan for Afghanistan was outrageous, though. I do think that.
Yeah.
But and that's another topic for us to talk about, the failed talks with the Taliban.
Well, John, I think we've covered enough for today. We've talked self-flagellation. We've talked interreligious universalism and exclusivism and
cosmological craziness. Yeah,
we've talked about Tibetan Muslims and Uyghur Muslims. I think we call it a day.
All right. So, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, folks, for listening to Crossing Phase. We are available at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and TuneIn. Wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, please take the time to rate and review us, especially in the iTunes store. We'd greatly appreciate it. And hit us up on Twitter at MTHawk or at JT Pinna. This is at Crossing Phase. This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, a podcast of Rolltop Productions. Music for this episode is provided by Vajra, whose music is available at thevajratemple.com, Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon. Show notes and other information is available at crossingfaiths.com.